Hey, what's up everyone, John the Geek here, and today I'm going to be building an AMD system, and the motherboard that I'm using was from a previous video, and this is the Asus M5A78L MLX, and this is a 95 watt motherboard, meaning it can only take a CPU that's up to 95 watt, and in that previous video I was using a 6-core 125 watt CPU, and although it worked, I couldn't do any overclocking because, well, the power wasn't right for it. There is another motherboard though that has a plus on it, and apparently that motherboard supports 125 watt CPUs. Nevertheless, the CPU I'll be using today is a 95 watt AMD FX 4100. This is a bulldozer CPU, and hopefully the motherboard BIOS will support this brand new CPU, and I might have to update the BIOS on that. We won't know until I actually fire it up. But let me go through the other parts here. I have a MSI 6850 video card and some cheap DVD burner. I have a hard drive, 1.5 terabyte Seagate Barracuda 7200.11 hard drive, stock CPU fan that I'll be using, and 8 gigs of Kingston HyperX memory, and then a 500 watt Cooler Master power supply, extreme power, I believe. The description and the names of all of these parts will be in the description of the video, just so you know. And so the case that I'll be putting it in is some cheesy, cheap $20 case that I picked up at Fry's. I'm going to be replacing this 380 watt power supply, even though it's actually enough to power all of this stuff here. I want something more reliable and that's going to last a really long time, because this machine is going to last a really long time. And so this is I would consider this a budget gaming rig. All of this together was about 500 bucks or less. And so again, the prices and links to the products on the Amazon links will be in the description. So let's get right into prepping the motherboard. Alright, so I've got the motherboard sitting on the box here, and if you don't have anything soft surface, then just go ahead and use the box. It's a really good platform to set your motherboard on. And so the first thing I'm going to actually install will be the memory chips. So what you're going to want to do here is open up the flaps, or the little wings that are on the side here, right? Get those ready, and then you want to line up this little notch with the notch that's on the motherboard here, right in that slot, right? And then what you're going to need to find is the little guides, those little slot right here, right into there. And then same thing on the other side, right? And you want to do both at the same time, right? And you want to go straight down and not at an angle, and then brace the motherboard. So grip the side of the motherboard here, brace for it, and then press straight down until you get that click, right? So I'll do it again. Right, and that's it. That's it for the memory. Now I'm going to do the CPU. Okay, so now I'm going to install the CPU, and one of the first things you want to do is open this little lever here. So once that's open, now you're going to take the CPU out of the container, and you want to be very careful not to damage the pins that's underneath here. So do what you can to grip the sides here, right? And you want to be very delicate and very careful with these pins here, okay? And check to make sure there's no debris or anything like that, any piece of plastic or anything in there. And once that's all good, what you're gonna do now is you're going to look for a little arrow that's on the socket, and on this particular motherboard it's going to be down on this corner here, depending on where you're looking at it. That's why they have this arrow indication here, and then on the CPU itself there is an arrow here, right, indicating that it needs to line up with that arrow there. So once you're ready to drop it in, don't literally drop it, but just ease it in there, and it should fall into place right into the holes there, and there shouldn't be any pressure or any force required. It should just drop right into place, and if there's a problem, then there might be a problem with the socket or one of the pins, so you'll have to make sure that it falls into place. Alright, so once that's done, then you're going to close the little lever, and that's it. Now we're going to be attaching the fan. Alright, so this is the stock fan, and it's already got the thermal grease right on there. That's already been applied. If you have a fan that doesn't have thermal grease, then just a little dot in the middle of thermal grease is enough. And so what I'm going to try to do is orient this so that the connector here will line up with the pins that's on the motherboard, so that it hooks around underneath there. Alright, so make sure that the lever is down on one end, and then once you got it hooked, you're gonna then flip the lever over, and you've now securely attached the CPU fan. Alright, so now you take the CPU fan connector, you're gonna plug it into a 4-pin header on your motherboard. If you don't have one, then the 3-pin will do just fine. The 4th pin is just for extra temperature sensing or speed control on that, so you want to find one that has the 4-pin, and the extra ones here, they're just for CPU cases, fans, or other fans that might require power. Alright, so that's it for the motherboard. Now we're going to prep the case. Alright, so the first thing I did with this case was remove both the doors, the panels on each side, and because I'm going to be replacing the CPU or the power supply, I'm going to go ahead and do that first and take this out, and then I'm going to install the new power supply. Okay, so next I'm going to install the standoffs. Now this particular case can accommodate ATX motherboards and also mini ATX motherboards, and you just have to line up the holes, right, that you need here, right, with the holes that's on a motherboard. So once you do that, then you can install your motherboard. Alright, next I'm going to install the I/O shield, and typically this comes with your motherboard, and if you lose it, it's not that big of a deal. You can always buy another one, or not used one. Your computer's not going to explode or blow up or anything without it. Okay, so now we're ready to drop in the motherboard, and so you're going to want to kind of go at it at an angle. Make sure that all the ports are lined up correctly, and then there isn't any pieces of metal blocking any of the ports. That's right over here. Alright, so now we're going to screw in the motherboard, and you're going to want to make sure that you use the right screws, because if you use the wrong ones, you're going to mess up the thread that's in the standoffs. And so these are the very finely threaded screws. Typically that's what the motherboard's standoffs take, and there's other ones that come with your case, and that's the coarse threaded screws, but these are for like the power supply or the graphics cards that's on the side here, or the hard drive screws, which are usually like this, right? So make sure that you use the really coarse one, and try it out on one of the standoffs. If you have one of the extra ones, just try it to make sure that it's the right fit, and that it screws in and unscrews easily. One thing you should remember is that don't tighten down all of the screws until the very last screw is in, and then once you've got everything in and everything's okay, then you can tighten down all of the screws. So that's it for the installing the motherboard, and now we're going to connect all the cables. Right, so I undone all the power cables, and I did a little bit of basic cable management here, but first thing I'm going to want to try to plug in is the power supply. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to connect is the power cable here, and this is a 24-pin power connector, and don't worry about this this little piece here that breaks off. It's really a 20-pin power connector, and then the extra 4 is if you need it, in which case this particular motherboard does need it. And so there's a little tab here on the end, and then there's a little clip here on the power connector, and that's how you know which side to which way to plug it in. So you just line those up and then you plug everything in, and the power connector is all slotted, so there shouldn't be any problems installing it. You shouldn't have to force anything, so if it's not going in correctly, then it's probably the wrong way, so just make sure you get the orientation right. Alright, so now there is one more connection on the motherboard, and your power supply might come with these two connections here, in which case this particular motherboard right up here only requires one of these. So you go ahead and break these apart and use the one that's that you're going to need to connect. And if you notice the shapes of the pins here, they're in like a little D kind of shape, and just gotta line it up with the squares and the shape that's on the motherboard. Alright, so now we're going to install the graphics card, and this is a 2-slot graphics card, so make sure you have 2 slots opened here on your case. So you're going to want to hold this on the sides here, and then you're just drop it in. It's very much like the memory sticks, and you'll be plugging this right here, lining up this notch with that notch on the slot. Alright, so now that you're ready to screw them in, use the coarse screws here that came with your case. Screw them down. Now plug in the power to the video card. Alright, so now we're going to install the hard drive into the hard drive bay. Now screw in the hard drive using the supplied hard drive screws. And do the same thing for both sides. Alright, so now we're going to plug in the hard drive using this SATA power connector, and you got to make sure that it's in that orientation where you sort of see a little L shape flipped on its side there, right? And make sure that it's lines up with the connector on the hard drive, and then just plug it in. Plug it in straight as much as you can. Don't go at an angle because it's very delicate and it could break. And now you're going to install the DVD drive in the same way. Typically it will take the same hard drives as on your motherboard, the very coarse ones. This is for the DVD drives. Right, so now I'm going to plug in the SATA connectors, and so you're going to also again want to line up the shape of the connector with what's on the actual device. So then once you line that up, just plug it in, and then find on your motherboard any of the ports. So then once you have that, plug that in, and then do the same thing for the hard drive. Alright, so now we're going to connect the motherboard cables, the front panel cables, and so the two easy ones is going to be the audio cable and the USB cables. So do those first. Alright, so the audio cable on this particular motherboard is over to the left here. right? And if you notice right here that the pins there, it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 pins. One of the pins is missing, and that's because this connector here is slotted and one of the slots is filled in, so that's sort of your key so that you know what which way to plug this in. So you line up that missing part, that missing hole there with the missing pin, and you'll be able to plug in the cable. Alright, so the same deal goes for the USB, and on this motherboard there's 3 USB headers, and any one of them is fine. And same thing on here, only the pin is missing where it's slotted on the bottom corner here, or the bottom corner. So then on the motherboard it's also missing on the bottom corner. Just go ahead and plug that in. Right, now for the most difficult part of this build, these little guys right here. Now most motherboards will come with a guide or manual that will tell you what to plug these in with, and this particular motherboard actually comes with a guide right on the motherboard, and so it's indicated as HDD. That's usually the hard drive LED, and then it has power button PWR BTN, and that means power button, and then the hard drive LED HD LED, and then the reset. Alright, if you look at your connectors here, you'll notice that there's a positive and a negative, and on the motherboard it might indicate which one's positive and negative. Honestly, I don't think it really matters because as long as it makes a connection. But if you really want to connect it properly, on the back of this little cable here is a little arrow, and that arrow indicates that it's a positive, that pin, that side is a positive. And then you'll have to look on the motherboard to see which indication is positive, and you're going to want to also resort to the manual, and it will tell you which one's positive and which one's negative. Alright, so that's how it should look there. Alright, now we're done, and with a little bit of cable management, everything looks nice and neat and clean. We're ready to now install the operating system. Alright, so now that you've started your machine for the first time, we're going to go into the BIOS and we're going to make some changes to the BIOS settings. And when you start it up, you're going to be presented with the logo screen here, and at this point you're going to want to press delete, the delete key, right, on your keyboard repeatedly. Just keep pressing it when you see the Asus logo, and once it starts up into the BIOS setup here, you're going to change the time, and this is military time, so you're going to change that, change the date. It's very important that you change this, otherwise you will not be able to update your computer. And then that's pretty much it. Nothing special or fancy with anything else. The boot device priority, you're going to want to change the first boot device to be your CD-ROM drive, second boot device to be the SATA hard drive, and third boot device, if you don't have anything, then I would suggest disabling it. That's just my own personal preference, and everything else you can leave alone. And if you're into overclocking, you can set certain profiles for that. Right, so then after that we're going to exit and save. At this point what you're going to want to do now is insert your Windows 7 disk, and I suggest for a system more than 4 gigs of RAM that you use Windows 7 64-bit. And then we're going to exit and save the changes, and it's going to reboot, and now it's going to boot into Windows. Alright, at this first screen here, we're going to go ahead and click on next, then you're going to click on install now, then you're going to accept the license terms, click on next, and then we want to do a custom, and we'll click on the hard drive that we want to install this on. And I suggest plugging in one hard drive, the main hard drive that you're going to install the operating system on first, and then later on, after you're done doing everything to install, to plug in the other hard drives that you might have. So we'll click on drive options now, then click on delete, and just to let you know, this is going to delete and wipe out the entire drive. So I'm assuming that you have a drive that's clean, fresh, brand new, or a drive that you don't really need the data off of, because this is going to be wiping this clean out, and this is a clean, fresh install. So press on delete, OK, then I'll click on new, then we'll use the full size of the hard drive, click on apply, then we'll click on OK, and it creates a system reserve. This is basically the boot partition here. Don't touch any of that, just leave that alone. Just let this be highlighted on the partition 2, which is mainly the bulk of your hard drive space, and then click on next. And now the installation process is going to take about 30 to 40 minutes depending on your system, but it shouldn't take more than an hour. So we'll be right back. Alright, so now that the installation has completed, I'm just going to go ahead and give it a name. You can put in anything you want. Password, I'm going to leave it blank. You can put anything you want. And then for the product key, I'm going to leave that blank. I'll insert that later. And then I'm going to use recommended settings for Windows automatic updates. And then don't need to adjust the clock, just let that go. And then now it's going to finalize the settings and should boot up into Windows 7. Alright, so now that everything's all booted up, the next thing we're going to want to do is insert our driver's disk. So this is the disk that came with the motherboard, and we'll insert this and let the auto run start up, and then we're going to install the proper drivers for this motherboard. Okay, so the disk has started, and it auto ran a little program that ran here, and the first thing it tries to get me to do is install some bloatware, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to click over on drivers. Now your installation process might be slightly different, so depending on what your motherboard manufacturer is you just have to follow and navigate through what they have to offer. Alright, so the computer just rebooted, and now I'm going to go through the Windows Update, and to do that we go to the Start menu, and then you go up to where it says Windows Update, click on that, right, and then we're going to click on Check for Updates, and make sure you do have internet connectivity. Alright, so right off the bat it found 97 important updates, and so we're going to go ahead and click on the 97, and not all of them are checked usually, so what you want to make sure to do is click on the checkbox up on the top so it marks all of them, and then in the optional area what you can do is click on the check mark to mark all of them, and so that should be good. Total, this is about 100 updates, and this is going to take a ridiculously long time, but this isn't the only batch, so I suggest that once you install the updates that you keep checking on check for updates, and it's going to take about 2 or 3 times, maybe even 4 or 5 times. It's going to take a few hours to update everything. I know it's a long and slow process, but this is just something you got to get through for the first time around on a new setup. And make sure that you also get the Windows Service Pack 1 for Windows 7 as well. And so after this we'll be installing a few light programs, utility programs. Alright, so after a ridiculously long process of updating and numerous restarts, our computer is finally up to date. And once that happens, what I like to usually do now is install some software that I like to call the Essentials. And I do that by going to a website. Now let's get through this first. And the website is ninite.com, ninite.com. And here's where I like to install. This is a really simple automated system of installing software. And all you got to do is just choose here what you want to install. So I like to usually go with Chrome and Firefox, and maybe Safari, Skype. It depends on the, I guess, on the user that you want to set this up for. iTunes, VLC, I'll go with that. K-Lite codecs, these are for video codecs for playing back video. QuickTime, I'll go with that. And then all of these runtimes like Java, Flash, Silverlight. And then I don't need any imaging programs. I'll do Adobe Reader or Foxit Reader. Either of those two are fine. I'll use Microsoft Security Essentials, which is a pretty good software. Malwarebytes and Super Anti-Spyware are the ones I like to use. And then I'll use TeamViewer for remote desktop. Dropbox, I usually do that if I have if I want to set up this computer with my account. I use TerraCopy. It's a great copying program for copying files. OzLogic, CD Burner XP for burning disks. Glare Utilities is a great program for cleaning up systems. 7-zip, and then developer tools. I usually do all the developer tools, but for this computer I'm not going to do that. Alright, so I'm going to click on download the installer, and then I'm in Windows Explorer, so it's asking me down here if I want to install or save, but I'm just going to hit save. It's a safer route to go with, right? And then I'm going to open the folder, and then here's the little file that it downloads onto your computer. This is sort of a an auto execute file. So when I click on that, click on run, it's going to then download each file and install everything. Then it's going to ask me for user account control, saying that this program wants to install files and programs and stuff and run on my computer. I'm going to click on yes, which, by the way, that takes me to disabling that. A lot of people advise against this, but I think it's annoying, so I'm going to uninstall it, or disable it. So I go up to the start here and I type in UAC for user account control, and then I'll just slide this bar all the way down. Click on OK. It's going to ask you one last time, are you sure you want to do this? Right, and then the next thing, right down on the bottom right here, the Action Center, it always pops up and it's kind of annoying to me, telling you that you need this for your computer and you need an antivirus program or whatever. But I'm going to go ahead and change the Action Center settings every time there's an update. I know that I should update periodically or whatever, but I'm going to go ahead and uncheck all of these so that it doesn't pop up on me. Then I'll choose OK, and then that's it. Another thing is the power options. That's the next thing I like to change. And by default it's set to like a balance or power saving. What I'll do is that I'll change this to high performance, right? And then turn off display. You know, you can set it if you're the kind of person that is away at your computer often, then you can set it to turn off the display. But if you're away from your computer and it's doing something, then you're going to want to set this accordingly, because if you're, let's say, running an antivirus scan or you're encoding something, and if you have it put the computer to sleep after like just 30 minutes, then all of your processes are going to stop, and then when you come back it's like you didn't really do anything. So depending on how often you are away from your computer, set this accordingly to that. I usually set it to never. And that's pretty much it for the basic settings. Oh, I'd like to put the icons on the desktop here, so what I'll do is I'll go to I'll right click on the desktop, go to personalize, and then change desktop icons, and then I'll choose computer user files, and that's about it. That's all I really need. Right, so now it puts these two icons on the desktop, and then I'll go ahead and sort this. I'll sort this by item type, and in here you'll have the you know, the downloads. This is where your downloads file goes, or your documents and music, pictures, videos, and all that. Right. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I hope this video was informative for you. Please comment, rate, thumbs up, thumbs down, subscribe, and thanks for watching.